New CEO fired me for being outdated after 15 years building the agency's client base. The look. They say betrayal makes you stronger, but no one ever taught me how to swallow it in a crowded conference room, under the fluorescent lights, while the very person I once mentored smiled as she erased my name from the nomination board. I still remember that dim room on the 6th floor where I had led the very first orientation for community media volunteers over a decade ago. That day, my hand rested on the cold wooden table. My palm was slightly damp with sweat, but my face was calm, unreadably calm. I sat there, surrounded by evasive glances, listening to a brief announcement from the board. We've decided to appoint Samira as the National Program Coordinator. Thank you, Kate, for your contributions. No warning, no prior discussion. And not even Samira, my once most trusted assistant, looked me in the eye when she stood up to accept the role, her voice trembling just enough to fake being overwhelmed. They didn't need to fire me. They just had to remove me from everything I once built. I used to believe this organization was family. We worked in educational media, supporting schools in remote areas, teaching emotional self-defense skills to children, creating mental health awareness campaigns and programs that advocated for women's rights. I was the one who drafted the first project proposal, secured the first grants, traveled to the border districts to pitch in person. We didn't have a budget for ad agencies, so I taught myself to edit videos, write scripts, and create social content. It was emotional marketing, not cold campaigns and targeted ads. For 14 years, I was the face of learning to be human, a program parents thanked me for at public forums, one that teachers hugged me for after every workshop. I never saw it as an achievement. To me, it was trust. Then, suddenly, I was out. No explanation, just a so-called organizational restructure for a youth-centered vision. I drove home in silence that afternoon. No radio, no phone calls. On the passenger seat was the printed action plan for the upcoming year, a plan I had spent 2 months crafting. I didn't know what to do with it anymore. My apartment is on the 10th floor, overlooking a small park. The late afternoon sun spilled through the windows, tinting the untouched tea on the table a burnt orange. I hadn't taken a sip. All I could see was Samira's face as she bowed before me that day, polite, humble, but her eyes were blank, empty. Some called me Ms. Kate, others Mrs. Capshaw. Samira simply said Kate, short, equal. I once thought it was a sign of closeness. Maybe it had always been her quiet way of erasing boundaries of power. I remembered a night 3 years ago when she messaged me in distress, overwhelmed and on the verge of quitting. I sat with her until 11 p.m., took her to see a therapist, and even asked our director to lighten her workload. I believed I was doing the right thing. That when you give kindness, it will be remembered. I was wrong. Kindness doesn't always become a lasting bond. Sometimes it's just the springboard someone uses to rise, forgetting who held them up the next day. I received an email invite to a formal handover, hosted by Samira. I wasn't CC'd in the speaker list. My name was absent from the script. No one asked if I wanted to say a few words. I didn't attend. That morning, I woke up late, brewed a cup of black coffee, and sat by the window, watching others head to work. I checked my phone. No messages from anyone in my former team. A few old colleagues sent sad emojis when they saw I was no longer tagged in the organization's social posts. But that was it. I had once been the center. Now I was just a blank space in their history. A week later, I received an unmarked envelope from the main office. Inside was a letter suggesting I transition to auxiliary projects, with a note. No need to attend strategic meetings. I understood. This was how they pushed me into the shadows quietly. Something in me went cold. That evening, I had dinner with an old friend, a retired journalist named Marianne. She had once partnered with me during the Speak Up campaign for children's rights in rural areas. I told her everything, every detail. She said nothing for 10 minutes, then gently placed her hand over mine. You were betrayed, dear, but you know, truly good people always get a chance to come back. The question is, do you still believe in your own worth? I stayed silent for the first time in weeks. I truly listened. I began rewriting everything from scratch on my old laptop. I retyped the original Learning to Be Human plan, but this time, not for any organization. I wrote it to remind myself that what I had created mattered. I reread every thank you email from teachers, every message from parents saying their child had changed after the program. I saved them in a folder named Still Matters. The closing moment of Act 1 came a week after the handover, when I returned to that same dark meeting room to retrieve a notebook I had forgotten. Everyone had left. I opened it, and the first page was torn out. It was the page where I had once written, "Emotional marketing is not a tool, it's a commitment." I said nothing. I quietly folded the notebook, slipped it into my bag, and walked away. As the door clicked shut behind me, I knew I had hit rock bottom, but right then, I began to wonder if I started over, this time without relying on any organization. Could I build something on my own? It took me almost a month to pull myself out of every old schedule. No more organizational emails. No more empty meetings. No titles next to my name. Strangely, I didn't feel empty. I felt light. I started taking morning walks in the park, every day at 7 a.m. I bought a cup of hot tea and sat on the third bench by the lake, the one with just enough sunlight streaming through the trees to keep me warm. I began to ask myself, what if I hadn't been pushed out? Would I ever have dared to create something of my own? I opened up those old abandoned projects, the ones dismissed for being too emotional, not aligned with organizational direction, too idealistic to secure funding. One of them was a media campaign about the silence of children living in homes with emotional abuse. Another was a digital platform to connect rural schools with young volunteer content creators. These were ideas once cast aside as unrealistic, overly sentimental, hard to scale. But I believed in them, because I once heard a sixth-grade girl say during a workshop, "Miss Kate, I don't know who to talk to. My parents always tell me I'm imagining things." But when I drew pictures in class, it was the first time someone told me I had a reason to feel this way. So I started planning small. I didn't call it a project. I didn't give it a flashy name. I simply wrote true stories, a tiny social media page where I would post real stories I had witnessed, stories that were once cut from the final edits because they lacked uplifting elements, stories that didn't need a happy ending to be worth telling. The first video was just an old audio clip, a young boy talking about being laughed at because his mother sold lottery tickets. I added some subtitles, used simple illustrations, and uploaded it at 8 p.m. on a Friday. I didn't share it on my personal page. I didn't tag anyone. I just wanted to see if anyone still cared. 2 days later, the video had over 50,000 views, more than 2,000 shares. The comment section overflowed with messages like, "I used to feel this way too, and thank you for sharing this." A teacher from Quang Tri messaged me, "Ms. Kate, may I use this video in my upcoming homeroom session?" I didn't reply immediately, My hands trembled not from emotion, but because I knew I had touched something real. I decided to buy an old video camera from a friend who used to freelance as a documentary journalist. I learned how to record better audio. I selected background music with intention, not to do media, but to, as I called it, document emotion. Each story became a quiet protest, a reminder that emotional marketing doesn't need a massive budget. It just needs to be honest. I began building a digital archive of forgotten people. A single mother in Bentray who ran a self-made life skills class for autistic children. A teacher who taught trade skills to students who had dropped out. A young girl who wrote poetry about the ache of not being heard. I called it The Unasked, my second video series. By the third clip, a local journalist reached out, asking if they could air a condensed version on Sunday morning television. I declined. I didn't want the message edited for palatability. I didn't make money from these videos. But the reach grew so quickly, I had to form a team. I called up a few people I used to work with, those who had quietly left the organization after being labeled not committed enough. Jason, the video editor, was unemployed after a post-pandemic layoff. Veronica, once a regional coordinator, now taught underfunded classes in the outskirts of town, still passionate, still under-resourced. We met in a quiet cafe, like nothing had happened, but our eyes betrayed us. We each carried our own quiet exile. We didn't need grand speeches, just a nod. I told them I can't promise we'll succeed, but I promise here, real values won't be dismissed as too emotional. Our first step was to form an independent, nonprofit collective called The True Circle, a group that told stories not for trend, not for shock value, but simply to remember that we were never really gone. We started receiving invitations to speak at schools. International organizations began emailing us, curious about this emotional communication model we were using. One NGO from the Netherlands proposed a pilot collaboration on their digital education platform. I told no one at the old organization. I didn't mention Samira, but I knew that some of them had watched our videos. I saw their quiet likes. I didn't blame them. Everyone needs to protect their seat. I used to be the same, but now I had nothing to protect. 3 months after the True Circle began operating full-time, I received a message late at night. This is Lynn, in charge of community content at Learning to Be Human. May I request a private meeting? It's internal. Please keep this confidential. I read the message several times. Lynn was a newer staff member. I had once trained her briefly in multi-platform storytelling. I didn't remember her face clearly, but I recalled her eyes the first time she spoke up during a meeting, hesitant, but sincere. I agreed to meet the next morning. Early coffee, familiar cafe. Lynn arrived on time, carrying a stack of wrinkled papers. She pulled out a project plan and whispered, "This is the original proposal you wrote, but now it's being presented under Samira's name." I looked down. Nearly every line I had written earlier that year, the structure, the interaction model, the outreach timeline was intact. The only change, the proposer's title program director, Samira Tran. Lynn continued, her voice low, almost afraid. The Dutch sponsor is reviewing it for funding, but they want to meet the person who implemented it. Samira declined, saying the original executor is no longer in the system, but someone on their side. They happened to see one of your videos. They noticed the similarity. I didn't react. I wasn't even surprised anymore. A week later, I received a call from the Dutch partner. Their tone was calm, almost too gentle, Mrs. Capshaw. Would you be able to confirm that you originally developed a content model called mVoice in early 2024? I confirmed, with archived emails, with the original proposal that had been dismissed in our internal meeting, with a behind-the-scenes video I had recorded, guiding my former team through a pilot workshop for teachers in Kontum. A few days later, they sent an official statement. The pilot collaboration is temporarily suspended pending a review of intellectual property concerns. I didn't know what effect that had on Samira. I didn't try to find out, but signs began to surface. A professor at the University of Media Studies messaged me, asking if I would speak on autonomous storytelling, a term I had once introduced during a private internal workshop. It was now being used under a new label in one of Samira's public talks. A parent, who had worked with the old program, sent me a private email. Their child, now part of the rebranded version of our initiative, had started feeling overwhelmed. He said it feels like he's being taught to tell a successful story, not to share anything sad. I didn't respond to every message, but I saved them all. I could feel it. Samira was straying from the heart of it. Emotional storytelling isn't meant to grab attention. It's meant to heal. Then, one Friday afternoon, while we were filming at a boarding school in the northern mountains, Jason nudged me to look at a new post online. Samira Tran, keynote speaker at the Asia-Pacific Community Education Forum. Topic: using emotional storytelling technology to maximize social media engagement. I froze, not because she was still using my ideas, but because she had turned what was once built on truth into a performance model. I took a deep breath. I couldn't intervene in her choices, but for the first time, I felt clear if I didn't say something. Those who still believed in authenticity might be misled. So I wrote a personal essay. I didn't name names. I just told my journey from someone pushed aside to someone who chose to piece together what had been broken, without polishing it into a motivational success story. I ended with this line: some truths don't need copyright to be protected, but they do deserve to be told in the right context. Not because I need my name attached, but because those who live honestly deserve to be represented by honesty. The piece spread beyond anything I expected. Former collaborators commented. Some reshared it with the hashtag is emotion-based marketing. For the first time in months, someone mentioned my name again on the old organization's public page. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. I picked up. Silence. Then a voice I knew. Kate. It's me, Samira. I didn't answer immediately. She continued quickly, but without sharpness. I know. Things got messy. I didn't think it would go this far. I just thought I needed to prove myself. I asked. So when you presented my model, what did you think you were proving? Silence. Then softly, she said, I don't know. Maybe. I was afraid no one would listen if I didn't have something in my hands. And your plan. It was the only thing people listened to. I wasn't angry. I was sad. Because I understood sometimes. The fear of being invisible drives people to betrayal. But no one teaches us how to apologize when we're standing on the podium. I said, I don't need anything back from you. But if you truly want to change, don't use the word emotion as a ticket to the stage. Start by apologizing to the people who believed in you. About 3 months after the True Circle began operating full-time, I received another late-night message. This is Lynn, Community Content Lead at Learning to Be Human. May I request a confidential meeting with you? It's regarding internal matters. I read it again and again. Lynn was a newer hire. I had once shown her the basics of cross-platform content design. I didn't remember her face clearly, but I remembered the way she looked during her first meeting, cautious, but earnest. We met the next morning, early coffee, the same small cafe. She arrived right on time, holding a stack of creased documents. She pulled out a campaign proposal and said in a hushed voice, "This is the original plan you wrote, but it's now being submitted as if authored by Samira." I looked down. Almost every line I had written earlier that year, the learning framework, the interaction pathways, the emotional engagement roadmap, was untouched. The only change was the attribution program, Director Samira Tran. Lynn continued, lowering her voice even further. "The Dutch donor is reviewing it for funding, but they requested to meet the person who actually implemented the model." Samira declined, saying the original executor has left the system, but someone on their team had previously seen your video. They noticed the resemblance. I didn't show any reaction. I wasn't even shocked anymore. A week later, the Dutch partner called, "Mrs. Capshaw, can you confirm you developed the M-Voice content model in early 2024? I did, with time-stamped emails, with the original version that had been dismissed in an internal meeting, with behind-the-scenes footage from a teacher training pilot in Kontum days later." I received their email. "The pilot collaboration is suspended pending review of content ownership." I didn't know what happened to Samira after that. I didn't ask, but things began to shift. A media professor reached out, inviting me to speak on autonomous storytelling, a term I had used privately, now appearing in a new version of Samira's public talks. A parent from the old program emailed me in private. "My child feels pressured by the new version of the project. He says it feels like he has to tell a successful story. He's not allowed to talk about sadness." I didn't reply to everyone, but I archived each one. I knew now. Clearly, Samira was drifting from the core. Emotional storytelling is not a spotlight tool. It's a vessel for healing. Then one Friday afternoon, while our team was filming at a boarding school in the far north, Jason nudged me and pointed to a new online post. Samira Tran, keynote speaker at the Asia Pacific Forum on Community Education. Topic: applying emotional storytelling technology to optimize social media impact. I froze, not because she was still borrowing from my ideas, but because she was turning something built on raw truth into a polished showcase. I took a long breath. I couldn't stop her, but I finally knew if I didn't say anything now, people who believed in truth might be misled. So I wrote a public essay, no names, just a quiet account of my own path from being edged out to choosing to tell real, unedited stories, not ones engineered to inspire. I ended with one sentence. "Some truths don't need intellectual property rights to matter, but they do need to exist in the right setting, not because I need credit, but because those who live truthfully deserve to be represented truthfully." The post went viral. Former colleagues commented. Some shared it with the hashtag #BarkEmotion-based marketing for the first time since I had left. My name appeared again on the old organization's public page that night. I received a call. Unknown number. I answered. Silence. Then a familiar voice. "Kate, it's me, Samira." I didn't say anything. She continued fast, but not defensive, I know. "Things got bad. I didn't expect it to go this far. I just wanted to prove myself. I asked when you presented my framework, what exactly were you proving?" She went quiet. Then softly, "I didn't know. Maybe. I thought no one would listen to me if I didn't have something strong to show. And your plan, it was the only thing people listened to. I wasn't angry. I just felt tired because I understood the fear of being invisible can push people to betray. But no one teaches us how to apologize from a position of power." I said, "I don't need anything back. But if you truly want to change, stop using emotion as a stage tool. Start by apologizing to the people who believed in you. The doorbell rang. Jason was standing there, holding our first official grant contract from an international foundation. Veronica stood beside him, beaming. We're officially full-time now. Ms. Kate. I looked at the original proposal I had once written, now renamed, but its essence preserved. It was no longer misused, no longer forgotten. I was ready, not to retaliate, but to prove a simple truth. Real value cannot be erased. 6 months after the House of Wind officially launched full-time operations, I was invited to give the opening keynote at the National Forum on Emotional Education for Adolescents. It was the same annual event once organized by the very institution I had left without a proper goodbye, learning to be human, this year. They renamed the forum Empathy and the Future, a gentle pivot. But as I scanned the guest list, I noticed something else. None of the old names remained. Samira was no longer there. I didn't ask why, but the day before the event, someone forwarded me a brief news excerpt from an internal education sector bulletin. The M-Voice Project Board has officially been dissolved due to failure to achieve expected community outreach outcomes. Just a single line, no names, no explanation. But I understood, if you build something just for show, it won't stand for long, because the audience of truth, they're not easily deceived. That morning, I stepped onto the stage without a PowerPoint. I carried only a handwritten notebook. Inside were quotes, fragments from our community videos, words not curated, not sanitized. I opened with a question. How many of you in this room have ever felt too unimportant to be heard? Almost half the hands went up. I told stories about the little girl who wrote poems because no one listened, about the 8th grade boy who feared his classmates' eyes, about the single mother who wrapped sandwiches in old newspaper but wrote children's stories for her son. I didn't use theory. I didn't cite research. I just spoke like I was talking to friends, to children, to people wondering if they mattered. And by the end, when the audience stood and applauded, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light, like I had finally laid the first stone in rebuilding a home once shattered by silence and doubt. A week after the forum, I received an email from a former staffer of the old organization. The message read, Kate, thank you, not because you succeeded, but because you didn't come back to step on anyone. You came back to lead the way. I didn't reply right away, but I saved that email in a folder named Proof That Doesn't Need Framing. Samira never contacted me again. But one day, while guiding a group of students in a school video project about emotional expression, I happened to see her name on a volunteer list for a school counseling center. Her role, video production assistant and content writer. No title, no spotlight, no big nameplate. But it was the place she once said she truly wanted to be. I don't know what brought her back to such a humble start, but I hope, this time, she's here to understand, not to prove. As for me, the True Circle has grown into a real community platform with a volunteer network spanning 12 provinces. We don't call ourselves a company or a project. We're just a group of people traveling across places, collecting the untold. Schools invite us to teach healing storytelling. Organizations ask us to help create digital content. But what I treasure most are the handwritten letters, ink on paper, stamped and sent to the House of Wind, where every morning still smells of toasted bread, echoes with soft laughter, and hosts conversations about how to tell the things you're afraid of without falling apart. I no longer see myself as someone betrayed. I'm someone who once believed, once got hurt, and chose to stay, then chose to move forward. And if someone were to ask me, what's your revenge through success? I'd say, It's not that someone lost their position. It's that I no longer need one to be myself. On the 1-year anniversary of The House of Wind, we held an outdoor screening, replaying the very first clips from True Stories. The audience sat on straw mats, eating popcorn, laughing softly as familiar faces appeared on screen. Jason whispered, "Ms. Kate, I think this might be the most epic comeback I've ever seen." I didn't say anything. I just looked at the screen, then looked at the people sitting beside me. Not everyone had stayed since the beginning, but everyone who stayed understood emotional storytelling can't be taught on a slide. It has to be lived. At the end of the screening, I took the mic and stood in front of those who had trusted me, doubted me, and stayed with me until now. I spoke slowly, without raising my voice. We've been called dreamers, weak, outdated. But if being outdated means believing in enduring relationships and in the power of authentic stories, then I'll gladly be outdated. I looked around the crowd. Some had tears in their eyes. Some sat still. And if you ask me, after everything, what helps someone survive betrayal? I paused. It's when you don't try to get revenge. You just refuse to let it define the rest of your life. You may have been cast out of the game, maybe, but sometimes that's the very moment you start playing by your own rules.